So, good afternoon to everybody, online and offline, and welcome to our seminar, Horizons of Science. For those who attend the seminar for the first time, let me say that we have rather long history. We are almost 20 years old, and it is an interdisciplinary seminar, which is a meeting point of scholars from different fields. And starting from this year, this seminar is common for another society which just appeared in LVIV due to the efforts of Ukrainian Catholic University and Simon's Foundation, which is LVIV Society of Fellows. Today I have the pleasure to represent you the today's speaker, Professor Jans Krause from Berlin, from the Humboldt University of Berlin. Professor Krause did his studies in the Free University in Berlin and in the University of Cambridge, where he received the doctorate. And then he had postdoctoral fellowships in Canada, in Princeton University in the United States, and the University of Leeds, where finally he became, he got professorship. And then he moved to Germany, to the Humboldt University, where he is professor of fish ecology. And at the same time, he is leading the department and the Leibniz Institute for freshwater ecology in Germany. Also, some 10 years ago, he was elected as full member of Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences. And also he holds a professorship in the Technical University of Berlin within the Common Cluster of Excellence, which joins efforts of several universities. His field of interest is decision-making, behavior, collective intelligence, evolution, social networks. In particular, he investigates the mechanism and functions of group life in animals with particular focus on social networks and on collective behavior. That's how we met, because our group from Institute of Condensed Matter Physics collaborates with physicists from Berlin University, applying some physical models to study onset of collective behavior. So with all this said, I have the pleasure to invite Professor Krause to give a talk. The stage is yours, and you are welcome to you.
Okay, so I hope you can see my presentation and hear me.
Yes, we do.
Okay, excellent. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to speak in your seminar series. It's a great pleasure to be here today. And I would like to show you what is essentially a collaboration between my own research group and that of Pavel Romanchuk, who you see on the right side of this first slide. Pavel Romanchuk is a theoretical physicist who now works in theoretical biology, and our two research groups work closely together, and I will present today some of the results of our members from our groups. Also important were Juliane Lucas, David Bierbach, and Carolina Doran, who are all shown in the photos here. And today I want to show you some of our work on the adaptive value of collective behavior. And first of all, I want to give you an introduction of what I mean by collective behavior. I will show you our study system, and then I will identify three big questions in the field of collective behavior that have functional relevance, and then discuss some broader points arising from that. So in our research group, we study essentially different types of social organisms. These can be fish, birds, humans, and large crowds, and they all have in common certain organizing principles. And in this slide here, you can see in the very center here an arrow. This represents an individual or an agent in a simulation. And around itself, this agent has a zone of repulsion, as we call it. So individuals want to avoid collisions with others, so they keep a certain distance. And then we also assume that there is a zone of orientation here in gray, within which agents or animals would essentially face in a similar direction to near neighbors. And then finally, there is a zone of attraction. If you have a neighbor within the zone of attraction, you would feel attracted to its spatial position. And what I have shown here is a metric model of collective behavior, but people have also made topological models of collective behavior where essentially the central individual would look at a certain number of near neighbors, let's say the 3 or 5 nearest neighbors, regardless of how far they are away. Andrea Cavagna, for example, is one of the people who have proposed topological. Oh, some noise on the system. And then there are sensory models, and I will say more about these towards the end. So what's important about these collective behavior models is that the individual only pays attention to its local environment, so to a few nearest neighbors. And if each individual in a group or a flock is doing this, then global level decisions will emerge from this. And I give you an example here. In fish schools, people previously did research looking at how they avoid their predators. These sand eels here became very famous because they show very different collective patterns of predator avoidance. And with these models of collective behavior, we were able to kind of reinterpret how these avoidance behaviors in these sand eels can arise. And essentially, individuals behave adaptively, avoiding the predator, and the global behavior of the fish school is seen as a byproduct. And now my first big question in this talk is, are these global behaviors just byproducts, or do they have a function? And what function could it be? And we see in this photo here a bird flock making this wave-like structure. And we see a little black dot here. This is a peregrine falcon attacking the bird flock. And the question is, does the wave of the birds actually have a function in itself? Now, people have worked on this for some time. And there are 3 papers here by Kasperger, Procaccini, and Ioannou, who all looked at global behavior patterns, and they proposed that some of these could have an anti-predator function. But in all cases, this was purely correlational evidence that global patterns coincided with the failure of the predator to be successful. And our question here was, can we actually make a causal link between a particular collective behavior and reduced mortality in the prey? And this is what we tested in the project I'm going to show you now. So the prey here is this fish, a little molly, a little freshwater fish, and its predators are these kingfishers, or here these kiskadees. And we now look at behaviors that these fish collectively initiate to be protected from such predators. We did this research in Mexico in a little sulfur stream, and we see some of the students here sitting in the reeds and doing their experiments. And this is our setting for this type of research. Now, the question is, why do we go all the way to Mexico to address this type of question? And the answer is, in this system, there is almost no oxygen in the water. And as a result, the fish have to rise to the water surface, where they form very dense carpets of fish at the water surface. So you can see the individuals moving here at the water surface, and we get densities of 1,000 up to 4,000 fish per square meter. So very, very high densities of fish. And of course, this will attract many predators that are then interested in these fish. Just a moment. So what do these fish do when a predator arrives? Well, they dive down, and this is shown here in an individual fish. So they dive down and they quickly come back to the surface. And for the simple reason that there is no oxygen in the water, so they can only briefly leave the surface for a few seconds and then they return to the surface. And when one fish dives down, this will trigger another individual, and that one another, very much like falling dominoes, where when the first domino falls, it will trigger other dominoes. And the reason I'm showing you this video here is that when it starts with a single fish or a few fish, it can actually trigger an entire fish school. Very much like in this video where we start with a very small domino piece, but the effect globally later on is for the biggest domino piece to fall. So I'm showing you now this thing for real. So here we see a video of a kingfisher sitting on this wooden branch here. The kingfisher is the little dark spot here. I filmed this from a tree, which is why it's a little shaky. And now the kingfisher will attack these fish. It hit the surface, and now you can see the waves of these fish. And as you can see, they get bigger and bigger, and the fish individually are only 20 millimeters in size. So what you see here globally are probably 500,000 or 1 million fish collectively responding to this one attack by the kingfisher. And this is something we see very rarely in nature, that such a small trigger will actually lead to a system showing such strong global responses in organization. And this goes on for several minutes. I'm not going to show you the entire video of this, but obviously the fish are responding very, very strongly to the attack of a bird. And now the question is, how effective are the fish with these waves in reducing predation by the birds? Before we get into this, I want to show you the attack of a kingfisher in slow motion. So here we see the kingfisher coming. It will hit the fish school, it plunges into the water, it emerges from the water, it flies away. We see here the first wave of the fish. We see here the water waves also initially at the surface, and the fish start responding, and here they respond again from the middle. And now we see the same behavior in a different predator, and this is a Kiskadee. So the bird comes, but only the very tip of the beak will actually go into the water and remove a fish. Initially, the fish make a wave, but now you will see afterwards no repeat waves. So this bird seems to have found a way to attack where the fish, apart from the initial overflight, don't realize that they have been attacked. So they don't make repeat waves for several minutes like I showed you in the video before. Now let's look at some data here. In green, the kingfisher, in yellow, the Kiskadee data. First of all, the number of waves after the attack in the kingfisher is much greater. The waiting time for a kingfisher after an attack is also much larger. And our assumption here was that the bird has to wait because the waves are kind of delaying its next attack, because the bird seems to wait until this waving behavior has stopped. And the question is, are the waves really causally responsible for the longer waiting time? Now, we can also look here at the attack rate of the bird per unit time. And we can see that the Kiskadee attacks more often per time unit, presumably because its waiting times are shorter as a result of not triggering waves. And interestingly, the Kiskadee per attack is less successful, but it attacks more often, so that the actual capture rate per time unit is the same in these two bird species. This was interesting for us as biologists because the kingfisher is actually a highly specialized catcher of fish. We can see this by its long beak, whereas this Kiskadee here is a very generalist predator, and it seems to have figured out a way of catching fish here opportunistically. Now, if we look at how the number of waves relate to the waiting time for this kingfisher, we can see that the more waves were made by the fish, the longer the Kiskadee waited. This already suggests that there is a relationship, but we still don't know whether it's correlational or causal. We did not find here a relationship for the capture probability with wave number. And now comes the experiment, which is meant to establish a causal relationship. So we took a fish school under attack by this yellow Kiskadee bird, and I showed you that they don't produce waves after the attack, but we created waves now by shooting either with a little air gun or with a slingshot, a little object into the water that mimicked an attack by a kingfisher. And now we can see whether the waves that we experimentally trigger will actually disturb the bird. And first of all, we can show that if we shoot into the fish school, we can trigger multiple waves by the fish, as opposed to a control where we just shoot into the water next to the fish school. And this is meant to be a control for the shooting itself, because shooting with a little gun or a slingshot, it makes a noise. This in itself could, of course, disturb the bird. So it's very important we have a control for this procedure, apart from showing that the shot into the fish school makes waves. And now we looked at the effect on the bird when the fish make experimentally produced waves. And indeed, we find that if we triggered many waves, then the waiting time of the bird is longer. And also, its success probability is reduced the more waves we triggered. And so this is then evidence for a causal relationship between the experimental stimulus we produced, which results in waves and actually causes the bird to wait for longer until it attacks again. And it has, for a given attack, a lower success probability. So this shows nicely, yes, I mean, the waves seem to be causally responsible for the lower success of the bird. So the answer to our first question, are these collective phenomena just a byproduct, or do they have a function of their own? Our answer would be yes, they do have a function of their own. But we do not understand yet what the mechanism is. So why do the waves actually cause a problem for the bird that is looking at them? And there are two ideas currently discussed. One is that these waves are perceptually confusing. So the bird will see the waves and it has a problem with processing this much individual information because so many fish are moving, and this prevents it from carrying out another attack. Another idea is that these waves have a signaling function, and this was proposed by Tim Caro in 1995. And Caro proposed a signaling of perception advertisement. So in theory, the prey may advertise that they have discovered the predator, and this would mean the predator is less likely to initiate an attack, because an attack on prey that is aware of the predator's presence has a much lower chance to succeed. Why should the prey inform the predator about its detection? Well, I mean, if the predator then doesn't carry out the attack, then the prey doesn't need to escape. And so ultimately the prey may be able to save energy by letting know the predator that it has been detected. So these are the two functions that we currently think about, or the two mechanisms. One would be the prey is confusing the predator. The other one is the prey is signaling to the predator. And currently we don't know which one it is. However, we think that these waves carry many or some characteristics that are typical of signals in the biological world. And according to Rufus Johnston from a very influential book chapter in 1997, signals are typically conspicuous, so easy to notice. They are repeated and they are regular. And if we look at the waves, I mean, if you remember this video I showed you where the kingfisher triggered a few fish and then the entire pond of 1 million fish was waving, I think you will agree with me that it was highly conspicuous. The waves are also repeated. I mean, you saw this went on for minutes, and they are also regular. And this is what you see actually in this graph here. So on the y-axis, we have the between wave interval length. And on the x-axis, we have how many waves were actually produced. And you can see that the interval between waves is about 3.7 seconds. And this remains pretty much constant regardless of how many waves the fish produce. So I think we can probably agree that these waves are conspicuous, repeated, and regular, which are typical signal characteristics in biology. But still, I mean, we cannot be entirely sure whether, therefore, this is a signal. Why is it interesting to speak of a signal? Well, I mean, in biology, we are always cautious to talk about signaling because, especially for a collectively produced signal, you could imagine that some fish don't participate in the making of the wave because they want to save energy or they want to stay deeper in the water for a little longer to be safe from the bird. And so these could be freeloaders. They let the others make the wave and they save the energy and the risk. And these fish could potentially have an evolutionary advantage because for the same benefit of the wave, they are not paying the same cost. So presumably this can't be evolutionary stable if the fish behave selfishly. We know that the fish in this system are not related. So they're not relatives of each other. So it's very unlikely that the fish kind of do a favor to each other. They will be selfish. And for this reason, we think it is unlikely that signaling could have been the primary function of this. But this is still under investigation at the moment. And with this, I come to my second question of the talk. And this concerns whether this waving could be a generic mechanism to fend off predators. And one of the big strengths of the collective behavior discipline over the last 20 or 30 years has been that the mechanisms of collective behavior can often be generalized. So here you see 4 different photos. One is here of a swarm of flies, a school of fish, a flock of sheep, and a flock of birds. And we see 4 different stages of agents in a collective behavior model. We see here this loosely organized set of agents, then we see the torus, we see the polarized group, and we see the highly polarized setting. And all that was changed in these agents was just the zone of orientation in the model that I showed you in the introduction. And we simply changed a little the dimension of the zone of orientation, and then we can produce all 4 states of the agents. So the beauty of this collective behavior model is we can actually, with one model, create different states by changing just very little the parameter of the zone of orientation. And this was one of the reasons why people thought these collective behavior models are very attractive, because they can explain a lot of phenomena in the biological world with more or less the same assumptions. Now, this concerns the mechanisms of collective behavior, but now the question is, are the functions of collective behavior equally generalizable? And this is my second question. The question is, does the waving provide a generic defense against different predator species? So is there a generalizable function? Why did we pick these predators here? Well, I mean, these 2 predators you're already familiar with. I mean, they fly at the fish school and put the beak or the entire body into the water. This one here, this brown one, it's called a green heron. I don't know why they call it green. To me, it's brown. But this one will actually sit on the riverbank and it waits. And it's highly cryptic, very hard to see for the fish. It waits for fish to come and then it attacks. And then this white one here, this will actually run after the fish, go into the water and pursue them. And these predators, they differ in appearance, they differ in hunting strategy, and they also greatly differ in size. So this kingfisher here is tiny, just a few centimeters, and this white one is a really big heron that should be quite obvious. So we investigated how effective are these collective waves against these very different types of predators. And I first want to show you here a video. So you see the white heron is hunting, and now it has discovered a fish school here. And what we normally would expect when a predator finds the prey, it would normally rush at the prey and attack. But this predator here stands still and watches the prey, and the fish are waving. And eventually you will see that the predator is even moving away. So let's see, it's looking up and down, and then eventually, okay, you don't see this here, but eventually it moves away. So this is normally not what we see. I mean, a predator detecting prey would attack the prey would flee, and here the prey will actually stand its ground. It produces these regular waves, and it's the predator that moves away. So this is very interesting, and we think linked to the waving of the prey. Now I will show you some observations on different predators, and I will show you what we measured. So the bird arrives on the scene. We can measure the time that it takes until it attacks in relation to the pre-attack waves that the fish perform when they see the arrival of the predator. After the first attack, we can measure the interval until a second attack, and we can see how that time is related to what we call the post-attack waves. Okay? And we have done this for these different predator species. We can see in this graph here that there is a difference in the pre-attack waves between different predators. For the larger predators like the egret, we see more waves than for the little kingfisher. However, for all predators, it is true that post-attack, so after a first attack, we see more waves than when the predator first arrives. Now we can look at how this affects the behavior of the predator. And we can see here the time to the first attack as a function of the number of waves. And we can see that the birds, they wait longer when there were more pre-attack waves. This is true for all species apart from the Kiskadee, because that bird is rarely noticed. Now, after a first attack, we see that the time until the next attack is strongly affected by how many waves the fish produced. So the time that the birds took was related to the behavior, the collective behavior of the prey. So to summarize, we can say that the repeated waves provided an anti-predator protection in both the pre and the post-attack context in terms of reducing the attack frequency, and that this was the case for different bird species that differed in size, appearance, and hunting strategy. So we believe this justifies us in saying that there is a generic effect of the waves on the predators, and this is probably related to the visual system of the predators, because the waves are essentially a visual cue. And now we can ask the question of how do the waves operate on the visual system of the predator? And this is where we can only speculate at current. So we think, first of all, it's possible that the bird, when it looks at the fish school, its eyes will follow the behavior of the wave and not actually the behavior of the individual fish, because each individual fish will just go down and then up again, but the wave gives the illusion of something that actually moves at the surface. So a first mechanism could be that the predators follow the behavior of the wave instead of looking at the individual fish. A second mechanism could be what we call contrast enhancement. So when a wave appears, the water surface will look white because of the reflection. And this will mean that the bird reduces it's kind of almost blinded by this, and it will reduce its contrast. And when the wave is over, these brown fish in this brown water will actually be very hard to spot. And people in neuroscience tell us that this effect will take about 2 or 3 seconds until the bird returns to its ability to see the fish again. So it's very possible that these waves actually reduce the ability of the birds to see the fish after a wave. And the last one I call here interrupting visual focus, because it's known that movement can sometimes create, well, in humans, it can lead to stopping saccadic movements of our pupil, so we stop tracking the movement of an object. In birds, they mainly track objects by moving their head. And so a similar effect is possible here, that the wave actually leads to the bird stopping in its tracking behavior of the object for a moment. So we don't yet know which mechanism is actually in operation here. And this will be one of the next steps in our investigation to understand what actually happens in the visual processing of the predator to create this general anti-predator effect of the wave. And now I come to the third question. So let's look again here at this model of collective behavior. And when people had the first, carried out the first simulations of these agent-based models, they investigated questions like this one here. This is a well-known paper by Ian Cousin. Here we looked at how many individuals do we need, the number of informed individuals, to achieve high accuracy in guiding a group from A to B, so essentially in a target direction. So it means you have a group of agents, let's say here 100, that's the orange line, and if 10 of them have the same preference for a particular direction, then this would be enough to guide this group of 100, so the other 90, in that in that direction that these 10 individuals prefer, with very high accuracy here. So we were very surprised to see that it took only 5 to 10 individuals to achieve such very high accuracy. And the question was also, where in the group do they have to be effective? And this was only a simulation, so the next thing is then to do it for real. So we took here 200 people. We have 10 individuals with a directional preference in this group. The other 190 do not know that these people are present. Everybody is told to just keep moving, to keep together, not leave the group. And then we can see whether these 10 individuals with a directional preference are capable of moving this crowd in a particular direction, and they are not allowed to talk while they are doing it or to gesture. So this is purely by kind of passive influence. And this worked very well. So these 10 informed individuals could guide a group of 200 in a particular direction in an experiment. However, it's very important that they are dispersed over the entire group so that each of these 10 can influence local neighbors. Okay, and this took us in the direction of these sensory models. And Lemarsan was one of the first to propose them. So in these sensory models, we do not only ask, who are my near neighbors, but the question is also, can I actually see them, or are they occluded by somebody else? So I can only be influenced by those neighbors who I can actually perceive. And this was tested by Winnie Pöhl, Pavel Romanchuk, and Ian Cousin's research group in this nice fish experiment. So they tried to predict, based on the network topology, what the response pattern would look like. And they stimulated here an individual fish or a few fish. And then they looked here at the first responders in red and how they were copied by others, which are in blue. And they found that depending on the topology of this network of fish here, the cascade of individuals responding will either be really long and maybe affect almost all fish in the school, or it may be very short and only affect a few fish. And this depends really on the topology of these interconnected fish, at who can see whom and what the starting conditions are. And so my functional question, which arises then from this, is the length of the cascade really of functional significance? So if we drop here a stone in a school of fish, does it matter where in the school it's being dropped for the cascade length of these waves that we observe? That was essentially our question here. And we did this experimentally. And here in the first graph, you see on the y-axis the number of waves. And on the x-axis, you see where into the school we shot with our slingshot or air gun. 0 here means we are on the edge of the school, either the right or left edge. 1 means we are in the center of the school. And as you can see, if we stimulate the center, we observe more waves. And initially, when I asked Pavel Romanchuk about his prediction, what would happen if I shoot into a fish school? Will there be more waves when it's the center or the periphery? And Pavel gave us the following prediction based on his simulations. He said, on the edge of the school, it will be easier to trigger waves because the fish will only have neighbors on one side, so they are buffered less. But the waves will not be very long lasting, so you will not necessarily see many. But if you trigger the fish in the center of the school, it will be harder to get waves going. But if you achieve that, then there will be more waves. So when we tested it, indeed, we found that if we stimulate here the center of the fish school, we see substantially more waves. Now, we found that this also in part depended on who was doing the shooting here. So here I was clearly more effective than here the other two scientists doing it. And it also depended on which of our fish schools we stimulated. The fish in school number 5 were less responsive than the fish in school number 1. But a statistical analysis showed that regardless of the scientists carrying out the experimental stimulation, and also independently of which school we looked at or the time of day, we can always reproduce this pattern that the center produces, if we stimulate the center, the school produces more waves than if we stimulate the periphery. Now, this should have interesting consequences, because if this is the case for our experimental stimulation, it should also be true for the birds that attack. This essentially means if the birds attack the center, they should have longer waiting times and reduced capture probability. So our prediction here is that the birds should have either evolved a response or learned to minimize the cascade length, or in this case, the waving, by attacking the periphery of this collective, of this fish school. This is something we don't know yet, so we will investigate this in future to see whether birds have indeed evolved such a preference. And of course, we would expect that this preference depends on whether it's the kingfisher, because this one really stimulates waves after the attack. So this bird should prefer the periphery. Whereas the kiskadee is almost like a null model. This bird doesn't produce waves after the attack. So this bird should be able to attack any position, whichever it likes, because there are no post-attack waves. So, to summarize from my talk, I hope I convinced you that we found a causal link between a particular collective behavior and a functional consequence for the predators in terms of reduced attack frequency and reduced capture probability. However, we do not fully understand the mechanism yet that protects the fish in terms of affecting the visual processing of the predator. We found evidence that this waving is really has a general protective function regardless of which predator attacks. So the fish always perform the same waving behavior no matter which predator is coming. And it seems to have the same protective function against very different types of predators. However, we do not fully understand yet how this waving really affects the visual processing of the birds. And then finally, we believe from models of collective behavior and also our experimental work that the consequences of stimulating collectives in different locations will have big consequences for the response of the collective. And we expect that predators should have learned that there are these consequences, but we have not yet tested whether predators have really learned to appreciate that or evolved behavior that is adapted to these consequences. And so in summary, I hope I have shown you that this system that we investigate in Mexico sheds some interesting light on co-evolutionary processes between predators and their prey, and that this deepens our understanding of public information use in the context of collective produced information. And one of our follow-up questions is, for example, whether this collective waving of these fish is an example of a collective memory that can preserve information about the attack of a bird for much longer than the actual presence of the bird on that location. And with this, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for your beautiful, very interesting, very attractive, fascinating talk. I would add, and also very interdisciplinary. You know, for my understanding is that physics is more about universalities, whereas biology is more about diversity. And here you were speaking about search for universalities in such a beautiful and diverse biological world. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. So now we pass to discussion. And, you know, some of attendees are online and some of attendees are offline in one of the halls of Ivan Franko National University in Lviv. So I suggest the following. Those who are online and want to put a question, please either write the question, you know, in the chat, or please raise a hand. And those who are offline, I kindly ask Professor Taras Banak, a mathematician who now is in the University of Lviv, to co-chair this session and to give the word to those who want to put questions offline. So please.
Ага. Мене чути, так?
Так.
Okay, so I have one question. So Professor Ivan Bolesta asked me to ask a question. So that is the truth. Okay, so he was interested in the question if this number of this praise or number of these biological individuals, does it generate some kind of higher quasi-intellectual behavior, so some intellect which is not preserved inside of each individual, but some collective kind of intellectual behavior. So what that was a question. Yeah,
this is a great question. I was tempted to include this in the talk today, but we are just analyzing data at the moment that pertain to that question. So I showed you this one bird that can attack and the fish make no waves afterwards, this yellow bird. This is not quite true. We found when the schools are very large, then they can actually notice whether this bird has put the beak into the school and made an attack or not. Because sometimes these birds will also just fly over the school and make no attack. And so we call the attack, if you like, the true positive, because then waving makes sense to defend. But if a bird simply flies over and makes no attack, you don't want to waste energy on waving. And now we find that the larger the fish school, the better capable they are to distinguish between a real attack and a harmless flyover. And so it really looks like the collective is much more powerful in discrimination than the single individual. And the interesting thing is when collectives make these kind of decisions, there are always two errors that are possible. One error is you overlook a predator that really made an attack, or you falsely respond to a harmless behavior because you didn't need to, it was harmless. These are the two errors, and we found that the fish can reduce both errors at the same time. And this is really quite remarkable because we know, for example, that a human doctor, when they look at a patient, they have this very problem. They look, do I have a disease? If they overlook that I have the disease, it's the first problem. If they think I have a disease which I don't have, it's the other problem. And doctors can normally only improve one, but then have the other issue, or they sort of lower their response threshold for both. And so it really appears that these fish have found a way of lowering the false negative and the false positive at the same time. So yes, we believe we have found a collective intelligence mechanism. We don't quite know yet how the fish do it.
Thank you so much. Some other questions? No? So
Yeah,
I have
if I may. If I may.
Okay, please.
Hello? Yeah, thank you. So one also has special term for this. They speak about wisdom of Krause.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you, you showed us, you convinced us that this collective behavior, global behavior has a function. It protects. So it allows for species or for animals, for fish to survive. Yeah. Now the question is it the right question to put to biologists? How is this function transmitted? So how it is transmitted, if I think on the scale of evolution? So those who survived, how did they pass this knowledge to descendants?
Yeah, so we believe the fish, basically they use public information. So they either observe the predator themselves, that would be private information, or they see that another fish is diving down, which is indicative that that fish has noticed something I haven't. And then I can decide to copy what the other one is doing, so I also dive. And we believe that fish which use this public information of others more, they survived more. And they would pass on their genes, and this would mean that the social responsiveness has actually been selected for. So fish that would not respond to what others do, they would survive less often than fish that were very attentive to what others do and what others detect. And this would be an explanation of how social responsiveness could be selected for, and this will ultimately give rise to this domino-like response, and this creates then ultimately these waves. And we believe that evolution has selected these fish in that way.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions, either from the room or maybe online? Online, you just can unmute your microphones, or you can raise hand, whatever you want.
So we have a question from the University. Yes, just a minute.
Your report was very interesting, and I'm afraid you already partially answered my two questions, but still I would like to ask. These two questions are connected one to another. The first question, I just am not a specialist in fishing, and by what means, how does a fish know or notice the predator, is it necessary for the predator to make a real, to perform a real attack and to hit a fish in order that others really recognize that there is a danger? Or does the fish notice a predator which is just permanently staying on a branch or somewhere else and watching the lake? And the second question is, well, if that bird during the whole daylight does not make any attempt to make an attack, then what will be the behavior? Will there be some waves? Thank you.
Okay, let me start with the first question. Yeah, this is a very interesting one. We can see that when a bird arrives, the fish can sometimes see from the water the change in the landmarks. And sometimes they will already make a first wave in response simply to a visual stimulus. However, these are almost never these repeat waves that I showed in the videos. So normally a visual stimulus alone is not enough. And what we found is when a bird attacks, they will create mechanical waves in the water that the fish can sense with their lateral line. They have the visual input from the bird coming down to the water, and they also hear the noise of an object hitting the water. And it appears that the fish only make the repeat waving by cue integration. So they need the three different cues, visual, auditory, and mechanical, together for them to produce, to invest in making these repeat waves. So they have found a very good way of filtering out false positives, where there's just some brief visual response or just a noise. It really needs three different sensory inputs that coincide. The second question, I was not entirely sure whether I understood it correctly. You wanted to know whether the birds only attack during daytime?
No, I mean, suppose a bird sits still all the time.
Ah, yeah.
What does the fish do?
Yeah. Yeah, this is this caused us some headaches as well. This because it's really true. If the bird will sit still for a long time, the fish will actually forget that it's there, and they will just go about their business. And then when the bird moves again a little, they will pay attention again. So it seems that after a while, whatever object newly arrives becomes part of their new map of surroundings, but it takes a while. So they seem to have a certain update frequency for their world, and we haven't fully determined yet what that update frequency is, but you're absolutely right. After a while, they just accept that there is a new object.
Thank you. Now I saw another question from the online participants.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a guy Amichai from now from Complexity Science Hub in Vienna. He seems he was going to put a question. Yeah.
No.
Hi. No, it's not really a question. I just wanted to comment that that these waves, it was the first time I saw these videos, and it kind of I thought it kind of looks like the BZ reaction, you know, from chemistry. Yeah, it's just another way of so it's not a question, it's just a comment that I thought it was an interesting comparison to make.
What kind of chemical reaction is this?
BZ reaction. I might not be pronouncing the names correctly, Belousov,
We call it
Zhabotinsky.
Belousov-Zhabotinsky, periodical chemical reactions.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. I'm not so familiar with this. Maybe you can send me a paper or something, then I can have a closer look at how, whether there might be analogies. It's always interesting to explore. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Guy.
We have a question from the university, please. Третя кнопочка, да.
A short question. Is it happen sometime that such waves appear kind of spontaneously or triggered by other triggers, not just by predator attack?
Yeah, Pavel Romanchuk invested quite a bit of time in this and published an interesting paper on that last year, because he is interested in the question of self-organized criticality, and he was kind of assuming that the fish might be in a very specific parameter space where they maximize the propagation of information within the collective. And for this, it was very important to see what the response dynamics of the system generally looks like. And I think he was particularly interested in whether some of these responses are scale-free, for example, which is one of the hallmarks of criticality. However, there is an issue, of course. When you see a wave in nature, in the fish, you can never be sure that there was no predator, because the absence of a cue is very hard to prove. It's much easier to see the presence and then the response of the animals than to say the fish responded erroneously, because you would have to really be absolutely sure that there was no cue that they noticed but you didn't, which triggered the behavior. So this is a general problem in science, I mean, to show the absence of a stimulus in a system. And this is why I refer to this study with the Kiskadee, where there will just be an overflight, so no attack, or it flies over and it puts the beak in. So we take the simple overflight as a behavior that wouldn't necessitate any repeat waves, and when it puts the beak in, then yes, they should. And this would be a better test for whether the fish provide truly false positives, or in that system, you know from the first diving of the fish that they notice the predator. Whether they produce repeat waves is then the answer, whether they really classify it correctly as harmless or as dangerous. So false positives, unfortunately, in biological systems are a real headache. So it's an excellent question.
And if I may, to add this, since the Pavel Romanchuk work was mentioned, he lectured for us in LVIV some time ago, and he had a chapter on this in the review series volume Order, Disorder, and Criticality. And he spoke about criticality hypothesis, telling that a group of living organisms sometimes has advantage of being near critical state, and sometimes it is disadvantage. And depending on the situation, the group is near critical states or further away. For me, it was very fascinating thing. And since this question was from LVIV, so please have a look on this volume 7 of Order, Disorder, and Criticality. There is a review of Pavel Romanchuk and his colleague Daniels from the United States about this thing. Thank you.
Yeah, so Pavel and I, we have a research grant at the moment from this excellence cluster that was mentioned at the beginning. And given that Pavel identified already that the fish can sometimes be in this or close to this point of criticality, our question as biologists is now, what do they do in terms of their interactions to get close to this point of criticality? And what do they do sometimes to go away from that point, and why? So we assume there must also be costs to be close to criticality. It can't always be the best solution, otherwise they would permanently be close to the point of criticality, and they clearly aren't. And so now it's a fascinating question of how biological systems can self-tune in order to achieve this, and sometimes to go away from it. And yeah, we have two clever postdocs, one on Pavel's side, one in my lab, who will hopefully solve this question.
Very good. In physics, we know that for a given temperature, if we want to move closer or further away from the critical point, we should modify the strength of the interaction.
Ah, okay.
On the other hand, for the given strength of the interaction, we should modify the temperature to be closer or further away. But that's kind of physics. And now we should look for biological interpretation of these factors. Some other questions?
May I ask the question and also the comment? So I was surprised that in such a beautiful biological talk, there was this so wise phrase that it is importance of school geometry. I completely agree with this statement. It's school geometry is very important, of course, but maybe school in different senses. So my real question was about modeling by cellular automata, this behavior. What is the models of this collective behavior? So I suggest that one of approaches is just this cellular automata. That means that interaction just on short distance, and they have such a results that this short distance interaction result in such a huge behavior, collective behavior. That is true, right?
Yeah, so this is exactly the approach that the Roman Schug lab took. And it was Luis Gomez Nava who published a paper with Pavel and us last year in Nature Physics, where a cellular automata model was used to show that we can generate, in fact, for collectives based on local interactions, self-organized criticality, because we felt it was not just enough to show that the fish show properties like some of these scale-free behaviors. And in the biology, we also wanted to see whether, based on first principles, we can generate self-organized criticality. And this was indeed the approach taken. So you are quite right about this.
Thank you.
After this more serious questions, I have, again, maybe naive and not that serious question. You know, as I understood, your fish is almost two-dimensional because they need oxygen, so they should be close to the surface. So then I know from my experience that fish is speechless, it cannot speak. Then if I think about group of objects which are living on 2 dimensions and which cannot speak, what else should they do? The only type of collective behavior should be waves, nothing else. Am I right? Or there are some examples of other possible collective behavior?
Well, I mean, it would be conceivable. I mean, many fish species make noises with their fish bladder, for example. So
they do noise.
Yeah. So there was a paper in PNAS, I think 2 weeks ago, on the smallest fish in the world. It's called a Danionella. It's completely transparent. It comes from Bangladesh and India, and it can make a noise as loud as a grasshopper. And it actually stimulates the swim bladder, and this makes the sound. And it's a colleague of mine here at the Charité in Berlin who published this article, and I went to his office and I can confirm I heard the fish. So this is indeed a possibility, but we have hygrophones into our system and we have not heard any noises.
I see.
However, I should say that the wave, when tens of thousands of fish make the wave, you can actually hear underwater the sound of the wave. So there is a possibility that one fish school is here and one is here. If this one makes a wave, this one may actually hear this and not even see it and respond. So the wave, when so many individuals dive down, is actually audible over longer distances. And when we stand by the river, we can hear the wave.
I see. Thank you. Some other questions? So if it is not the case, I just can only dream. And the dream would be that the right peace comes to Ukraine. And this seminar is kind of offline. We all are together. and Jens is with us, and the other attendees are also with us. I describe you the situation. The building of the university is in the center of the city. That's beautiful ancient building. In front of you, you have a park. It is Ivan Franko Park with monument of Ivan Franko. Nearby, there are many cafes. So definitely after such seminar, we will invite the speaker and we all together will enjoy staying together. Unfortunately, it's not, that's only the dream, but let this dream come true. And you all are welcome, very welcome in future to come to our city, to come to Lviv, to stay with us. And thank you for coming to Lviv intellectually, and your participation in these seminars and your questions of those who attended the seminars also helps us in Ukraine and to feel that we are all together. That's what I wanted to say. And also what I want to say that for those who attend seminars offline, the 2 next seminars will be also in English. And usually we meet the 3rd Thursday of the month. You are very welcome to check on the homepage of the seminar, the schedule and the title, and you are very welcome to attend. With all this said, I again cordially thanks to today's speaker for giving this lecture. Many thanks for those who attended the seminar. And before ending the seminar, also I give the word to Lviv, to Taras Banach, to our colleagues. Maybe you want to say something at the end also.
So thank you very much for very impressive talk, and it's not only biology, but I see, and it is physics and computer science. Everything is collected and very interesting. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed coming. Thanks. Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.